Thanks for being with us for part two of tonight's debate devoted to David Cameron's whistle-stop tour of Europe, this charm offensive that he's on to try and convince European partners of the need to change ahead, of course, of the British referendum due to be held in 2017, or possibly even, we're told, next year. David Cameron is in Paris tonight as part of that tour. We're discussing his chances of getting the sort of reforms he needs to be able to go back to the British public and campaign for a yes in the referendum, a yes to staying in the EU. I'm joined by Christophe Robit, who's our Europe editor, also by Helen Conway-Mouret, who's a senator, Socialist Party member here in France. We're joined down the line by Charles Tannock, who's an MEP and who represents the Conservative Party and is in Brussels tonight. We're also joined from the UK, from London, by Pavel Svidlicki, who's a policy analyst at Open Europe. In fact, I'd like to start with you, Pavel. A moment ago, we were talking about this two-tier Europe that has developed ever since the creation of the Eurozone. I wonder whether with David Cameron seeking these sorts of reform, in a sense, we're not simply moving towards an ever greater divide between the two sides of Europe, and whether one couldn't imagine that he'll get the sort of reforms he wants that will allow those perhaps outside the Eurozone greater freedom. It's sort of confirmation of a move that's been going on for years now.
Well, exactly. I think that's the right way to characterise it. I think maybe not even a two-tier, but a multi-tier Europe is indeed already a fact. And I think David Cameron is right to try to make sure that that this is reflected, ideally in the EU treaties, but possibly, as Charles was saying, via some kind of agreement that can then subsequently be annexed to the treaties. And certainly Britain is far from the only member state that won't be joining the euro, or at least won't be joining the euro in the immediate future. We saw in Poland the president-elect, Andrzej Duda, won on a platform of opposing euro membership until living standards in Poland are equivalent to those in the West. So certainly there will be other member states who will be supportive of the drive to ensure that there are safeguards put in place for non-Eurozone members.
Hélène Conway-Mouret, perhaps this is something that will suit everyone, a looser association for those who want to stay outside and the ability for those within the Eurozone. And we've seen Angela Merkel and François Hollande's determination to move ahead towards greater federalism confirmed only recently. Perhaps it will allow them to move ahead faster, for others to stay behind in a looser arrangement. It's a win-win.
Maybe so, but I'm not too sure that David Cameron will have time to have everything in place before the people go to the polls. And I think that's where the danger is. The question is not whether the EU should reform itself, whether there should be political pledges put in place, and indeed different tier union operating. The question that's going to be put is whether Britain is in or out the EU, and it's a totally different question. I think it's a very dangerous one.
Charles Tannock, it is. We now know what the question is going to be. It's a simple yes or no. If you want to stay in Britain to stay in the EU, you'll answer yes. If you wanted to leave, you'll answer no. Even if David Cameron seems to be able to get the beginning of something that looks like a reform of the EU, or the stories of reforms that he's looking for, is this not a terribly dangerous game that the Conservative Party is playing?
Not at all. I mean, David Cameron has made this promise for a long time now. Many doubted, particularly UKIP, said he would never deliver on this promise. In government now, with this magnificent victory recently, as a single party with a working majority, David Cameron is going to deliver on his promise. We need a renewed consent. Anybody younger than myself would never have had a vote to agree to all the powers that have been transferred since 1975, the last time there was a referendum. I think it's high time that consent was renewed. I hope this will be a good majority to stay in. I will be campaigning for a yes vote, provided a meaningful package of reforms can be brought back to Britain and put to the British people by David Cameron. But David Cameron's made it very clear he wants to stay in the European Union. And this new accommodation will not just be for Britain. There'll be other countries who may wish to also share the variable geometry in the different arrangements. We do need a slightly more flexible Europe. And certainly it's always been the Conservative agenda for a wider, looser, more flexible Europe, and it plays into our sort of thinking. There will be variable geometry. There will be countries in the Eurozone and even countries like France and Germany who want to integrate more. And there'll be others, in Eastern Europe and in Northern Europe and Britain in particular, who want to be slightly more semi-detached and more cognizant of our kind of relationships with America, with the Commonwealth and so on. And I think this is the kind of picture that most Europeans would understand and could share. It's quite clear if there is rejection of all our demands, then I think there will be a real problem when the referendum comes. And that will be very sad for Britain and very sad for the European Union, which will lose not only 10% of the share of its budget, but a major military power, a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN, and obviously a country with huge links through its history to many parts of the world. So I'm going to be campaigning to stay in, and I hope we can convince the British people. But we do need a cooperation from the other member states to allow some of these changes to be made.
A tweet now from one of our viewers. Brexit would be beneficial for the EU, disastrous for the UK, and Scotland would probably stay in the EU. The Commonwealth would go. Pavel Svidlicki, we were being reminded a moment ago by Christophe Robit, referendums have been held before in European countries, and referendums have gone the wrong way from the point of view of what the government wanted.
Well, certainly, I would question whether or not in a democracy the referendum can really go the wrong way if that's what the majority of people want. I think the referenda in France and the Netherlands certainly should have prompted a more fundamental rethink on the part of many people in Europe. I think we're slowly starting to get that after also the European Parliament elections, where we saw turnout falling and a record vote share for anti-EU, anti-establishment parties across the board. So it's certainly welcome that slowly we are starting to get this rethink, and I think the new European Commission is certainly more open to the idea of reform than its predecessor, although there is still a long way to go.
Christophe Robit, what would, if one looks ahead to this referendum, and as Hélène Conway-Mouret was reminding us, we believe it's going to be 2017, could be 2016. We could be looking ahead to a British campaign very soon, British referendum very soon. If the answer is no, and as Pavel was just saying, it's absolutely legitimate. If the British choose that they want to go, even if the Conservative Party campaigns for a yes, if a majority of people say no, they want Britain to leave the EU, it will leave. What will it mean for the European Union?
I think it would be very bad news for the European Union. As Charles reminded us, Britain, along with France, are key defence players. Britain is very important also to Germany, because Britain is a liberal free market economy, and Angela Merkel certainly likes that. It would be bad news for everyone, because it could well be the beginning of the end. Nobody can tell. And we're currently talking about a possible Grexit at the threat of a Brexit. This is very bad news for Europe at a moment where we see rising Euroscepticism, where Europe is trying to really find its place in the world. But I think more essentially, from my point of view, it would be a tragedy for Britain. And I really believe that the British people, and I hope that the referendum, but that the campaign will allow us to have a proper debate about the benefits of Europe, because I think that losing access to the single market would be a disaster for Britain. And let's remember that if Britain wants to keep its access to the single market, it will have to pay in, like Norway does, for instance, at the moment, without having a say in all the decisions that are made in Brussels. And trust me, when you talk to officials in Brussels, the British are very, very efficient. They're very present. They have a very strong diplomacy, a very strong presence in Brussels, and they have a say, and they certainly help shape the way Europe is. I don't think that Britain should ever lose this voice in Brussels.
Hélène Conway-Mouret, what would it mean for the EU if Britain were to leave?
I think it's a worst-case scenario for everybody. Everybody has something to lose in that. I think the implications for, Scotland. It's a part of the UK, which is very committed to the EU. In Northern Ireland, I think it will have disastrous implications, because there you have two communities that finally have to come together, that are living together, working together, and that would have a question that will divide them again, as one part of the community would want to stay or remain within the EU, and the other one may follow, of course, the British response to the referendum, to the question posed. So, and then, of course, the Republic of Ireland, which needs the UK. I don't see the Republic of Ireland exiting the EU to follow the UK. So it's the worst case scenario for all these different regions and countries. And as it has just been said, very rightly by two people, the UK is central to this continent. I don't see France continuing its security policies without the UK. I mean, we have the Saint-Malo agreement, and we are just in what we need to do for the security of Europe together. So, but having lived through 4 referenda in Ireland myself, the answer given and the campaigns that were fought were not on the questions that was asked. And I believe in democracy. I believe in asking the question, but I'm going to be very cynical. I'm not too sure that there are very many European citizens today that are interested in the nitty-gritty of the institutions, that will have an interest in the various agreements that David Cameron may indeed reach with his partners. And it's not what makes people dream today. They want other things. So I'm just very concerned, and I agree. Any political candidate running a campaign that wins has to deliver on the promises made, and I think David Cameron has no other option, and what he's doing is absolutely right. But at the same time, he's going to be leading a yes campaign with a divided party behind him, because not everybody in his party is convinced that the UK should remain in the EU, which is going to create a weakness in itself. And then there will be various forces for various reasons wanting to exit. And there is a media in Britain which is very anti-Europe, and that has to be taken into account too.
We're going to come back to that in just a moment. We're just going to listen in now to this press conference, which has begun at the Elysee Palace.
And I congratulated him on the success he had, which allows him to have a large and stable majority over the next 5 years. So we're going to work together, the same way, in fact, that we have been working together for 3 years, as far as I'm concerned. The UK and France enjoy an intense relationship that is based on trust. It is intense because economically we trade a lot with each other, and we also have a lot of Brits living in France and French people living in the UK. But also the relation is intense because on a number of crucial topics, in particular defence, we have mutual interests and a rather advanced degree of cooperation, including on military nuclear. We have a trust-based relation also because we have responsibilities at a global level as members of the Security Council, France and the UK, and also because in light of our history, as well as in light of our vision for the world, a common desire to support countries that ask for that support from us or expect a lot from our interventions in Africa, and we've also seen that in the Middle East. We also share a desire to fight terrorism, and I want to thank David Cameron, who was one of the first persons to call me after the Paris attacks and marched with us on the 11th of January, and we have an intelligence cooperation that is extremely intense and once again based on trust. We also share a common position on the upcoming climate conference. Again, on that front, David Cameron and his government were amongst the first to support us in preparing for this major event and in making sure that at this early stage we were already able to best prepare for this event through a number of announcements on funding. In fact, there are upcoming events, G7, the UN, regional groups, as well as other conferences that will help in preparing for the climate conference in Paris. In our talk tonight, we mentioned the place of the UK within the EU. France would like the UK to remain a member of the European Union. There will be a referendum, as was announced, and it will be up to the British people to decide what it wants for its future. We think it is in the interest of both Europe and the UK to be together. But, of course, you need to respect the people's will. David Cameron will present his proposals. We will discuss those proposals and we'll see how we can move ahead to make sure that the British people can be consulted and make a decision that corresponds to its will. And over the next weeks and months, there will be discussions that will involve the European Commission and the European Council. And we started mentioning those issues tonight. And I want to thank David Cameron for accepting to give us a few hints at this stage today, even though the proposals will only be made at a later stage.
Thank you for the welcome here in Paris. And I'm delighted to be back in Paris. France was the first country I visited when I became Prime Minister 5 years ago, and I'm delighted to be back here so soon after winning the general election. France is an essential and valued partner of Britain. Our economies are interwoven. We are the two major military powers in Europe, with global reach and with shared values. One of my first acts as Prime Minister was to draw up the Lancaster House Agreement to take defence cooperation between our countries to a new level. And I remain completely committed to that task. I want to strengthen our defence cooperation further, not just projects, but acting together where our interests are shared around the world and where we need to safeguard our countries and our peoples. We're both committed to tackling extremism around the world and defeating terrorism. So this is a broad and deep relationship that benefits both our countries. Tonight I want to focus briefly on three specific issues where Britain and France need to work together to advance our interests. First, the big challenges facing the European Union. My priority is to reform the European Union to make it more competitive and to address the concerns of the British people about our membership. The status quo is not good enough, and I believe there are changes we can make that will not just benefit Britain, but the rest of Europe too. Of course, the priority for François is to strengthen the Eurozone to ensure a successful single currency, and Britain supports that. We want to help the Eurozone work better, and we do not want to stand in the way of closer integration. So we have different priorities, but we share a common objective, which is to find solutions to these problems. And what matters is that the European Union and its 28 members are flexible and imaginative enough to respond to these issues and to work together to find answers that will make the European Union more successful. That is the challenge of our times, and I believe strongly that we can meet it. Second, climate change. This is a vital year to secure an ambitious deal that can combat climate change. I'm fully behind President Hollande's efforts to reach agreement at the summit here in Paris in December. We need an outcome that keeps our goal of limiting global warming to 2 degrees within reach. The UK is already playing its part, but we need to do more to get the private sector involved, fostering research and innovation into new clean energies and supporting growth and jobs. That's why we'll put £50 million of our existing climate funding towards a new international initiative that will back new technologies for a clean energy economy. Quite simply, it's time the market got to work on climate change. Third and finally, I want to discuss threats to our national security. Last time I visited Paris, it was to join in the march with so many leaders after the outrage at Charlie Hebdo. The world stood united with France that Sunday, and we stand united with France today. The threat from Islamist extremists remains, and we will fight it together, whether that is turning our own young people away from this poisonous ideology, whether it's assisting Iraq's security forces, supporting the moderate Syrian opposition, bolstering the political process in Libya. France and Britain will be partners. We'll also work together to stem the vast flows of migrants across the Mediterranean from Africa. President Hollande and I agree that we need a comprehensive approach. We must do more to tackle the causes that drive these people from their homes and stop us returning them there, rather than focusing all our efforts on how we handle those who've already crossed the Mediterranean. So there's much to discuss, and I'm looking forward to our conversations now over dinner. Thank you.
That was François Hollande and David Cameron speaking after their meetings. Very little in the way of new information. Christophe Rabit, proposals are to be made. Perhaps, though, it goes some way to reflecting what we were just saying, that it is a two-tiered Europe that is seems to be being confirmed. He respects and understands François Hollande's need and objective to seek ever greater European integration within the Eurozone. He wants to renegotiate the rest of the EU.
And yet the British Prime Minister said that the status quo is not good enough, so he wants a better deal. Visibly, he hasn't yet totally explained what he means, because the French president said that he only got a hint of what Britain wanted to achieve. We understand that the package of measures that David Cameron wants to secure will be presented at the next EU summit in June. François Hollande said that he wants Britain to remain in Europe, but it's up to the people of Britain to decide.
In the end, Pavel Svidlicki, going back to what we were saying a moment ago about the possibility of a British exit, I want to take it back to what Helen Conway-Mouret said a moment ago. A referendum, of course, will give the British public the chance to decide. A certain number of changes or concessions one can imagine David Cameron returning to Britain from Brussels with over the course of the next months and couple of years. And yet, it will be an emotional vote for many, as Hélène was reminding us, the nitty-gritty of the detail of what being inside Europe or outside Europe really means may not be fully understood by many of the people voting. Many will vote with their heart in the end. So it remains a dangerous game, does it not?
Well, there's certainly risk involved in pursuing this quite bold strategy of having the renegotiation and then the referendum. But I actually think that it would have been very risky for David Cameron not to do anything, because clearly sufficient public discontent had built up with the current terms of EU membership. And had David Cameron not done anything, then he wouldn't have really been listening to his voters and to his party. So I think he was right to embark on this course. In terms of the specifics of the renegotiation, I think that although he will need to table specific proposals, the more that it can be about the broad sense of where the EU is going and how the UK fits into the EU, into this new multi-tier EU, the better it is. And then the more that the specific reforms will add up to more than just the sum of their parts. They can be, so specific reforms can further this objective about making the EU more flexible, more competitive and more democratically accountable.
Oh, while we await the details of the proposals, Charles Tannock, and looking ahead to the referendum, one can understand why he felt the need to do it. It is a gamble, though, and it is double or nothing.
Well, I have to say, I thought that was a brilliant speech by my Prime Minister. I was very proud that he was there showing real confidence and leadership. And I think his personal authority in Britain is very, very strong now, given the somewhat unexpected victory we had on the 7th of May. And I think, to be honest, the first thing that I thought when I saw that, the two great European leaders there, was this is like a new entente cordiale going back 100 years when King Edward visited Paris. It's an extraordinary speech by both and a recognition of how much binds France and Britain bilaterally. But I detected tremendous confidence and leadership in David Cameron, particularly confidence that he will be able to gain significant and meaningful changes in the areas which are of concern to the British government and to the British people, and that, therefore, he has every confidence and respect in the electorate to deliver a yes verdict. So I didn't see any nervousness there. I think he was delivering on a long-held promise.
It was Christophe Robit, a confident tone, and on François Hollande's part, words that seemed to suggest the possibility of compromise. Of course, even as he seeks these changes to Europe, David Cameron is going to be helped by the fact that there are other people seeking changes to Europe. That is, there are a growing number of voices within the EU seeking precisely the kind of thing he's looking for, which is change.
No, I agree, and I think that on things like, making sure that EU migrants don't abuse the welfare system, I think that most leaders will agree, and I think that the Dutch, the Danes, the Swedes are very much in tune with the British Prime Minister on a number of things. But I think the red line is to recognise that Europe is there to basically, allow European people to travel, the free movement of people, the free movement of goods. Then we can see how we can tweak this, and it's fine to have a multi-tier Europe. I think we can all work with that. Regarding the campaign, yes, I think it will be very emotional, as you said. I think we can draw some lessons from the Scottish referendum. I think at the end of the day, probably what will happen, although nobody can gamble on that, is that British people might decide to choose the devil they know rather than the devil they don't. But then also what we learned from the Scottish referendum is that it didn't settle the issue for a generation, as the British Prime Minister had claimed. The issue is still there. It remains very divisive. So I'm not sure that even if the British people decide to stay, it will be the end of the story. There might be people within the Conservative Party, and I'm not even mentioning UKIP, who will continue to ask for more devolution.
Either way, interesting times, both in Brussels and in Strasbourg, and as well as in London. We'll, of course, follow these changes over the course of the coming weeks. Thank you very much indeed to all my guests from London, from Brussels, and here in the studio in Paris for having joined us for tonight's debate. That is the end from us. In just a moment, though, the very latest headlines and the news.